The quiet of the night was broken by the rustling of leaves as Mr. Frank, a retired police officer, took his nightly stroll through the neighborhood park. His loyal Belgian Malinois, Max, walked close by, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. For Frank, these evening walks were a moment of peace, a chance to reflect on his years of service and enjoy the companionship of his steadfast dog. But that peace shattered in an instant. Frank felt a sudden yank on his arm, forcing him to stumble. He turned to find himself face to face with three young men. The leader, Joey, wore a sinister smirk as he waved a rusty pocket knife. "Hand over everything you've got, old man," Joey barked, his voice filled with mockery. Max instantly tensed, his ears perking up and his posture shifting to full alertness. His growl, low and guttural, rumbled like distant thunder. Frank, staying calm, raised his hands. "Listen, boys," he said in a steady, commanding voice. "I'm just an old man with nothing worth stealing. Walk away, and we'll forget this ever happened." Joey, unimpressed, signaled for Pete to move forward. Confidently, Pete lunged, but before he could get close, Max sprang into action. With lightning speed, the dog launched himself at Pete, clamping his powerful jaws around the man's forearm. Pete screamed in pain as the knife fell to the ground. He stumbled backward, clutching his arm, while Max released him and returned to his defensive stance between Frank and the attackers. The third thug, Skinny, tried to circle around Max, but the dog pivoted smoothly, keeping himself positioned between Frank and the threat. His movements were precise, almost calculated, as if he had rehearsed this scenario 100 times. Joey's smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. "That dog's crazy," Joey shouted, stepping back instinctively. Frank seized the moment. Using his walking stick for support, he lifted it with authority. "Enough! I don't want to hurt you boys, but I won't let you push me around." Only when they were out of sight did the dog relax, his body softening as he turned to look at Frank. The old man knelt beside him, running a hand over Max's fur. "Good boy, Max," Frank said with a smile, his voice filled with gratitude. "You've done it again." Something told him this was only the beginning. The next morning, Frank awoke to an unusual commotion outside. Pulling aside his curtain, he saw a small group of neighbors gathered on the corner. They were gesturing animatedly, and their voices, though muffled, carried an edge of urgency. Max, resting near the window, lifted his head and perked his ears at the noise. Frank chuckled. "Looks like the neighborhood gossip mill is working overtime," he said, patting Max on the head. "Come on, let's see what the fuss is about." Lawson pursed her lips, unconvinced. "A misunderstanding with Joey. That boy doesn't know the meaning of the word. You'd better be careful, Mr. Frank. He's bad news." He tried to assure everyone it wasn't a big deal, but their worried expressions lingered in his mind long after he returned home. That evening, Frank found himself replaying the confrontation in his head. Something about Max's actions had been extraordinary. The way he had attacked Pete's arm without causing serious injury, the precision with which he had positioned himself. It wasn't normal. Max had always been a smart and loyal dog, but this was something else entirely. Memories of the day Frank had adopted Max surfaced. An officer from his old precinct had given him the dog as a retirement gift, mentioning something about special training. At the time, Frank had brushed it off. Max was supposed to be a companion for his golden years, not a weapon. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Standing on the porch was Mike, an old friend and former colleague from the police force. His expression was grave. "I heard about last night," Mike said as he stepped inside. "We need to talk." Frank looked over at Max, who lay by the door, his keen eyes watching the conversation as if he understood every word. Mike leaned forward, his voice low. "You need to be prepared. If this escalates, it's going to get dangerous. For you and for Max." People stopped him during his walks to thank him or to marvel at Max's bravery. Some even brought over small gifts, homemade pies, fresh bread, or toys for Max. While the gestures were kind, they only added to Frank's growing unease. The attention wasn't entirely positive. On more than one occasion, Frank spotted suspicious figures lurking near his house. The presence of the black sedan parked across the street some evenings didn't escape his notice either. Max, always vigilant, would growl softly whenever the car was nearby. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Max began barking sharply, his body rigid as he stood by the front window. Frank followed his gaze and saw the black sedan again, this time parked directly in front of his house. His heart sank as Joey, Skinny, and an unfamiliar man stepped out. The stranger was tall and broad-shouldered, carrying a crowbar that gleamed under the streetlights. Frank acted quickly. He locked the front door and grabbed his walking stick. "Stay close, Max," he murmured. The dog was already on high alert, his eyes never leaving the approaching figures. Before they could reach the porch, a voice called out from the shadows, "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" It was Robbie, the young neighbor studying at the police academy. He emerged from the side of the house, holding a flashlight in one hand and a baseball bat in the other. Joey sneered. "Mind your own business, kid." The man screamed and fell to his knees, struggling to shake Max off. Joey and Skinny hesitated, their bravado faltering. Robbie took the opportunity to swing his bat, striking the ground near Joey's feet as a warning. "You want to try me next?" he growled. The commotion attracted the attention of nearby neighbors, and within minutes, the faint sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Joey cursed under his breath and turned to run, but Max, releasing his first target, lunged after him. In a flash, the dog intercepted Joey, pinning him to the ground with a calculated bite to his arm. By the time the police arrived, the gang was subdued. Officers praised Robbie's quick thinking and Max's incredible skill. Frank, standing on his porch with his walking stick, watched the scene unfold with a mix of pride and relief. "That's some dog you've got there," one officer remarked as he helped cuff the suspects. Frank smiled, scratching Max's head. "He's more than just a dog. He's family." Inside were photographs of Max in action during police training sessions, detailed records of his service in the K-9 unit, and a letter from the unit's commander. Frank skimmed the documents, his hands trembling slightly. "I always knew he was special," he said quietly. "But that gang will see him as a threat, and so will anyone they bring in for revenge." Robbie, now a local hero in his own right, took on a leadership role, helping to train others on how to stay safe and vigilant. Meanwhile, Max's reputation continued to grow. Children in the neighborhood would stop by to pet him, and Frank often found himself explaining the dog's remarkable skills to curious onlookers. But for Frank, the most important thing was that Max remained his loyal companion, always by his side, always ready to protect. One quiet evening, Frank sat on his porch, with Max lying at his feet. The sun dipped low, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood. Robbie stopped by, carrying a small bag of treats for Max. "How's the old man doing?" Robbie teased, sitting down on the porch steps. "Still kicking," Frank replied with a chuckle. "And thanks to this guy," he added, patting Max's head, "I plan to keep it that way." For Frank and Max, life wasn't just about surviving. It was about protecting the people and the place they called home. And as the stars filled the night sky, Frank knew one thing for certain. With Max by his side, he could handle anything.